This video is more on color and tonal corrections, and I could start out by putting on a levels adjustment and making sure that I have all of the tones from black to white, but the color is so far off that it's distracting. That background should be a neutral gray, kind of like the background of my computer screen here, and it's very, very blue. The reason for that is because when the picture was taken, the camera was set at the wrong white balance. So the white balance is very important in your camera. If it's wrong, we can fix it somewhat in Photoshop, depending on how far off it is. Before I color correct though, this should be a vertical image. So I'm going to go to Image, Image Rotation, and I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, and that stands for clockwise. And now we can see the image the way it really should look. But again, I don't want to start with levels because that blue is so distracting. I want to fix the color first. And I'm going to fix the color with a curves adjustment. So it's the third adjustment in the top row there. And when I click curves, you can see I get an adjustment layer called curves. And here's my adjustment down here. And the best way to color correct, and this only works if you have a neutral area in the image. And since the whole background is neutral, I have a very easy neutral area. This only works if you have a really neutral area, and it's using this middle eyedropper here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to click on it. That's the gray eyedropper. And wherever I click, it's going to turn that area into a neutral gray. Whenever you're color correcting, one little hint is to look away too, because if you see one color and then see another color very quickly, your mind might not see that one is correct and one isn't. If you click in an area that's clearly wrong, you're going to get really bad color. But if you can find a very nice neutral that you're really comfortable should be a neutral gray, and it still seems a little bit blue to me. I'm going to go with that. Now that looks better than it did. So if I go like this and I turn off that adjustment, you can see I fixed it. It's not as blue as it was, but I'm really not as neutral as I was here yet. So I am going to use another adjustment layer. Before I do, what would happen if I were to change this? Let's take a peek at our histogram for a minute. Oh, it's not too bad. We've got a few little combs. But if I were to change this to luminosity, like I had you do with the levels adjustment when we were affecting tone, then I'm telling Photoshop that I don't want it to look at color. I only want it to look at dark and lights. So that would be a big mistake. So that's a case when we absolutely don't want to use luminosity. We want to keep it at normal. Okay, I want to go back to my adjustments and I want to see what other choices I have here. And this hue saturation really does come in handy. So I'm going to grab a hue saturation layer, and again, this is new to Photoshop CS4, but it's this little hand tool, and I am going to click in here and just reduce the color a little bit more. So it's calling it cyans. It says it's taking out cyans. I want to take out a little bit of blue too, and I'm just going to do that on my own there. And this also works just on the master slider. So if I took it all the way down, I would have a black and white. And I kind of want the background to be pretty black and white. So that looks pretty good to me. And let's toggle that eyeball on and off. Well, the background looks good, but I sure like the flower better without the hue saturation. So what can we do to get that color back? Well, I'm going to change my foreground color to black. I'm going to make sure I'm on the mask, because if I paint with black on a mask, I will be able to see what's below. And what's below this layer, as you can see when I turn off the eyeball, is a nicer color to the flower. So I'm going to make sure I'm working on that. I'm going to make sure I have my paintbrush and that I'm painting with black, and that will bring the color back to any area that I paint. So this way I get that nice neutral tone in the background, and I get my color brought back. I might even bring my color back. It's not going to make a giant difference, but a little bit in that glass. I'd like to remind you that you can option click on the mask if you want to see it and tidy it up a little. Not all that neat all the time. And that looks pretty good. Another thing I want to talk about in this video is dodging and burning. And I think that flower would look a little bit nicer if it were a little brighter, if it just popped a little bit more, or maybe even looked a little bit glowing. And the way I'm going to do that is to dodge, and dodge just means to make lighter. And I'm going to show you kind of a better way to dodge than the dodging tool. So you could actually come over to the toolbox, and there is a dodge tool, there is a burn tool. But when you have a large area, and this flower is pretty big, it's better to use a paintbrush. And what we're going to do is make a blank empty layer. And I can either do that by clicking on this sheet of paper, or I could say layer, new layer. Either way works, whichever's easier for you. I'm going to use this little piece of paper. And the best way to dodge a really large area, I think, is to change the blend mode to soft light. Now it's kind of hard to remember which blend mode works with dodging, but it's something you just have to memorize, soft light. And I'm going to grab a paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint with white on this blank empty layer. Now the reason that I'm doing it on a blank empty layer, not only so that I could make the blend mode soft light so I get a nicer look, it's because if I make a mistake. So if I actually come over here and paint, let's turn off these eyeballs and see what I did. All I have is some white over here. So if I grab my eraser and I don't want that, I can just erase it, because remember, this is just a blank empty layer. So let's turn all these back on, and let's see what the difference looks like there. Oh yeah, that looks much better to me. Now, if I thought that was too much, I could lower the opacity a little bit. Maybe I like that a little bit better. And what if I wanted to burn an area? I better name my layer here dodge. Burn is the opposite of dodge. That is, it's to make darker. And a good way to remember it is if you burn toast, it gets darker. And we'll start with another blank empty layer, and we might as well name this one, oops, don't double click on the layer, double click on the word, burn, and we're going to set the same blend mode that we did for dodging, but this time we're going to paint with black. So I'm going to switch to black there, get a little smaller brush, and I'm going to, oops, I'm on my eraser, I don't want that, I want to be on a paintbrush. And I'm going to paint with black and bring that out a little bit. And actually, I don't really like the way it looks up at the top, but I like the way it looks at the bottom. But I don't have to worry about that because, again, if I turn this off, you'll see that it's just black painted on a blank empty layer. So if I turn my eyeball back on and switch to my eraser, and I erase that part of it, now I've got the bottom part burned and darker, and not the top. Oops, looks like I missed a little bit up here, so I'll erase up there. And again, I can lower the opacity of the entire layer if I want to make it just a little bit more subtle of an effect. So what did we do? We used curves and the gray eyedropper to take a lot of the blue and cyan out. And then we used hue saturation to take even more out, so we got a nice neutral gray background. But we used a mask with the hue saturation to bring back some of the color, or actually all of the color of the original flower. And then we went even further and dodged the flower and burned the vase. The last step for us to really be finished with this is to sharpen it. So a reminder, sharpening should be done at 100%, so I'm going to double click on my zoom tool. I'm going to hold down my space bar, and I really want to look at this flower here. Make sure I'm on the background layer, because if I tried to sharpen a curves layer or a dodge layer, the flower doesn't exist there, so I can't sharpen it. So now I go to Filter, Sharpen, and Unsharp Mask. It puts the numbers in that I used the last time, and I'm going to just click the preview on and off. And I don't really see a difference. Let's move this up a little. Oh, that's a little too much. So I don't think I've ever gone over 2. So I'm going to try 1.7, and maybe I'll take this down to 0 for a minute. Oh, I think that's a little bit too much too. So let's bring that threshold up. So I want it to look sharp, but I don't want it to look garish or too sharp. So I'm going to take this down even one more, and I think that looks pretty good. And let's say View, Fit on Screen. And let's go to our, let's turn all these off for a minute. So I can either hold down the mouse and turn all the eyeballs off. There's our before, and there's our after. Or I can hold my Option key and click on the background, and that turns everything but the background off. So there's the before, and there's the after. Much better.